Hello, everyone. Welcome to the CFPR weekly seminar. So my name is Senhu Wang. I am from the NUS Department of Sociology. And today it's our great honor to invite Professor Cathy Liu to give us an interesting presentation. Professor Liu is a professor of sociology and a director of Family and Population Health Laboratory at Michigan State University. Her research is broadly guided by the aging and life course perspective to study social determinants of health, in particular, marriage and family processes related to population health uh, among the heterosexual and LGBT plus populations. And Professor Liu has received several prestigious national awards, including an NIH Career Award. In addition, she is an elected fellow of the Guentological Society of America and Butler Williams Scholar selected by the National Institute on Aging. And the topic for her today's presentation is loneliness among sexual minority older adults in the United States. So let's welcome and give the time to Professor Liu.
Thank you, Senho, for the nice introduction. And first, I want to thank Park and thank you for the Center of the Family and Population Research for giving me this opportunity to share my work. I'm very excited to, to share my work overseas with colleagues in Singapore. And the study I'm going to present today is actually based on one of my recent projects to look at health disparities among the older sexual minorities in the United States. And today I will focus on one particular health outcome, loneliness. And before I start, for those of you who are not familiar with this area, I want to, briefly to clarify some basic terminology, so help you understand the context of this research. So you probably will hear people talk about sexual and gender minorities altogether, but these actually are two groups, two different concepts here. Sexual minority refers to individuals who identify as gay, lesbian, or bisexual, or who are attracted to or have sexual contact with people of same gender. So it's mainly about sexual orientation. And the gender minority refers to individuals whose gender identity or expression is different from their sex assigned at birth. So it's about the gender expression. So it's really includes the transgender and the gender non-conforming population. So the study I'm going to present today is focused on the first group, the sexual minorities, because we don't have the gender minority in our sample. And because these two groups of people usually overlap a lot, so many statistics, show them together. So in the background, I will talk about LGBT, the two groups together, but my research, I just clarify, it's just about LGB, sexual minorities. Give you a little bit background about this population in the United States. That's a context my research is about. So in the United States, in 2012, there are 3.5% of the Americans adults identify as LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. And this number increased to 5.6% in 2020. So it's almost doubled in less than a decade. So this is one of the most rapid increasing segment of US population. And in the past few decades, it has received increasing attention from both public policy and also from the scientific academic community. And the general, the public perception about LGBT people usually, focus on the younger community. we usually, when we think about LGBT, we think about younger people, and a lot of social policies and research focus on the younger group. But the older LGBT also represent a disadvantaged group, but understudied. And in the United States, there are more than 2.7 million adults aged 50 and above identify as LGBT. And this number is expected to reach 5 million by 2030. So this is not a small group. It's not a small group as many people had thought. And older sexual minority people face not only the challenge the general population will face in the process of their aging when they get older, but also face challenge and unique challenges related to their sexual minority status. But recent research, there are very limited research, especially population-based, national representative study about this group of the population. So that's the research gap we are trying to focus on. So I'm especially interested in loneliness. Loneliness is one of the most painful human experience. It has been shown to have a negative effect on both mental and physical health, and it can be related to, linked to the higher risk of mortality and a lot of the chronic conditions. So it's has very serious consequence here. And I want to note here, loneliness is a again, for those of you who are not familiar with this topic here. So loneliness is a subjective feeling of being lonely. So it's different from another contact, sociological contact, social isolation. Social isolation is more objective, lack of social connection. Loneliness is subjective feeling. Like people, like you guys live in Singapore, you have friends, you have family, colleague all around you because you live in a city life, but it doesn't mean you don't feel lonely. So social connection doesn't mean people will not feel lonely. So loneliness is a subjective feeling, just to clarify this. And in the United States, about 1 out of 5 Americans, that's 15% of Americans age 50 and older, report a feeling of loneliness. And the current pandemic will make it worse. So we don't have the statistics here, but we know the number probably will be even higher during the current pandemic, due to the social distance policies and the stay at home implication. And we also expect loneliness is likely to be even more prevalent among older sexual minorities than the older heterosexual population. This is because, prejudice and discrimination against the sexual minorities may disrupt their social contracts and connections, make them harder to develop and maintain their social relationship. That may further lead to feeling of loneliness. But little population-based research has examined how loneliness may vary by sexual orientation. So this is my study. So we work from a social relationship perspective to hypothesize how sexual orientation may affect, maybe linked to loneliness. Social relationship is a broad concept here. It includes multiple layers of relationship. As an inner core of the social relationship, for most adult people, the partner or spouse is the most important social relationship. for most adult people during their life. So I'm a scholar studying marriage. I always see and always read the paper, see marital relationship is the most important social relationship that affect people's health during adulthood. And followed by the marital relationship and also other family members like children, parents, or other family members are also the important, source of social support and emotional support. So that's a little bit, outside the layer of the relationship besides the marital relationship. And when, for most of older adults, when they don't have spouses, when they don't have family members, they may go to friends or their neighbors or community, to ask for help and support. That's even the most outer side of the relationship. So what I want to see here is this kind of social relationship is mostly based on the heterosexual study based on the heterosexual population. So the core is partner, spouse, then other families, then friends, and the community. But it's likely it's work differently for the sexual minority population because their life experience is different. So sexual orientation may affect the social relationship differently across different sexual orientation groups. For example, a gay man came out to their parents. If their parents didn't accept his sexual orientation, and this person may choose to disconnect with their parents, or their relationship become worse because of the family rejection. So in this way, the sexual orientation actually affects the social relationship. So this is just one example here. And also a lot of research has shown that social relationship may affect the loneliness. Again, based on heterosexual the literature. So based on this theoretical framework, we developed the following hypothesis we want to test. The first, we expect older LGBT adults are lonelier than older heterosexual adults. And second, we expect the higher levels of loneliness among LGBT people are attributable to their disadvantages in the quantity and the quality of their social relationships in various domains, including partnership, family, friendship, and community relationship. Our third hypothesis is the conventional defined innermost layer of the relationship, like spouse, partner, and family members, contribute more to the loneliness disparities than the outer layers of the relationships, such as friends, community members. So that's our research hypothesis. And to test those research hypotheses, and we use data from the National Social Life, Health and Aging Project. For those of you who are not familiar with this data set, this is one of the most comprehensive data sets to study intimate relationship and health in the United States. So it's a national representative population-based study and conducted by the NORC at the University of Chicago. And the data is the longitudinal data. So the first wave of the data was collected in 2005. And the second wave was collected in 2010. The third wave is 2015. They are currently collecting the first wave. Because of the pandemic, there was some slow the process of the collecting, but the first wave will coming out very soon too. Because the sexual orientation question was only asked since wave 3, so wave 3, wave 4, but wave 4 is not ready yet. So the analysis is restricted to the wave 3 data. So we use the wave 3 data. So although the data is longitudinal, but our study just use the one wave 3 data. And we restrict our analysis to the respondent who has complete information on sexual identity. Some people who didn't answer the question or refused to answer the question are not included in our study. And we also conducted multiple mutation for other missing cases for the social relationship variable. So the final sample included about 3,600 older adults aged 50 and 97. That's the data. So to measure sexual orientation, actually this is a very, this could be a very interesting topic, how to measure sexual orientation. So, but because I'm using the separate data analysis, I just basically just use whatever the data can provide me for this. So we use several questions here to measure sexual orientation. Of course, the first one is the most important one, the sexual identity. So it asks, do you consider yourself to be heterosexual or straight, gay or lesbian or bisexual? So this is basically to ask a sexual identity of the respondent. And NSHAP also asked the respondent in their entire life about how many men or how many women have they had sex with, even if just only once. So this basically tell their sexual experience. So based on these questions, we categorize the respondents into 3 groups. The first group is a heterosexual identified individual with no same-sex experience. So this is basically the straight group, the heterosexual group. The second group is LGBT identified individuals, regardless of their sexual experience. So if they identify them as gay, lesbian, or bisexual, no matter they have reported whether they have the sexual experience, and we treated them as the second group, LGBT identified individual. The third group is heterosexual identified individual with same-sex experience. So those people, although they identify them as heterosexual, but they have same-sex experience. It's important we include the third group here because for a lot of the older adults, they use different term or they didn't come out. So they may not identify or openly identify them as heterosexual, but they may have heterosexual experience. So they are also part of the sexual minority group. So that's why we include the third group here. About loneliness, so we used a short version of the UCLA loneliness scale. So the original UCLA loneliness scale has 20 items here. So NSHAP used the short version, so include 3 questions from the loneliness scale. So the 3 questions are how often the respondent feel lack of companion, how often the respondent feel left out, and how often the respondent feels isolated from others. So based on these 3 questions, we sum and standardized the response, so created the loneliness scale. So that's our dependent variable. And for social relationships, we take advantage of the NSHAP data that includes multiple potential measures about the social relationship. That's also the strength of the one important strength of the data, has a lot of social relationship variables. We include 4 domains of social relationship variables: spouse, partnership, and other, family, and friends, and community and neighborhood. For each domain of the social relationship, we include both the quantity and the quality measure of the relationship. For example, for marriage, for spouse-partner relationship, we include the marital status and also include the relationship quality, like the partner support and the partner's stream, to measure the quality of the relationship. For other family relationships, we include number of close family members, and we also include the family support and family strain to measure the quality of the family relationship. In terms of friends, we include the number of friends and also friend support and friends stream. And for all those support and stream, we did factor analysis to create some score for the skills. If you are interested in this, and I can talk about more about the skills. For community and neighborhood, we include the community participation skill. That's also a skill based on some item like volunteer work, attend meeting, attend religious service to generate a skill, and also include the quality of the neighborhood relationship, positive neighborhood quality skills and negative neighborhood quality skills. So those are the social relationship variables. And for all analysis, we control age, gender, education, race, ethnicity. And for the analysis, we have two steps here. The first step, we estimated a series of the regression models using sexual orientation to predict loneliness and social relationships, and to understand how loneliness and social relationships vary across sexual orientation groups. So the model depends on the dependent variable we have. We have OLS regression, multinomial regression, and ordinal logistic regression to the first step. To understand how or whether the social relationship explains the loneliness gap by sexual orientation, and we conducted the second step at a series of nested models. So the dependent variable is loneliness. We use OLS regression, and the base model, the model one, it's just use sexual orientation to predict loneliness with all the controls included. And the model 2, 3, 4, 5, we added the social relationship variables separately into the model to see how each relationship may affect the sexual orientation difference in loneliness. And the final model includes all variables. This is the result from the first step. Basically, that's multiple regression result. The left variable set of variable lists the dependent variable. So that's from different regression models here. So let's first look at the loneliness. So for loneliness, the LGB identified individuals had significantly higher level of the loneliness than the heterosexual individuals without same-sex experience. That's our reference group. And the heterosexual with same-sex experience also had higher level of the loneliness than heterosexuals with no same-sex experience. But you see the gap is smaller compared with the LGB and the heterosexual with same-sex experience. For the social relationship, for the marital relationship, and it's not surprising. So LGB older adults are much more likely to be divorced and never married than the heterosexual group without same-sex experience. And interestingly, we didn't see the difference in their relationship quality, the support stream. So basically, the LGBT couples and the heterosexual couples, they have same relationship quality in terms of stream and support. And we didn't find significant difference in terms of marital relationship for the heterosexuals with and without same-sex experience. And for other family relationship, and compared to their heterosexual without same-sex experience group, the LGB are less likely to have larger number of close family. So they have a smaller size of close family. And they also have for less level of support, lower level of support from family. And there was no difference in the family stream. Again, we didn't find significant difference between the heterosexual with and without same-sex experience. And in terms of friend relationship, and we didn't find the difference in terms of size of the friendship network, number of friends between the LGBT people and heterosexual people without same-sex experience. But compared with heterosexual people without same-sex experience, LGBT older adults are more likely to receive, or I should say, receive higher level of the support from their friends. But at the same time, they also receive higher level of stream from their friends. So this is basically like the dark side of social relationship. You get more support from the friends. You also get more stream from the friends. Again, here we didn't find the significant difference in terms of friendship for the heterosexual with and without same-sex experience. For community participation, we did find LGBT people are less likely to have lower level of involvement in their community or neighborhood event than the heterosexuals who have no same-sex experience. Again, no difference between these two heterosexual groups with and without same-sex experience. So here we find the LGBT people and also the heterosexual with same-sex experience had higher level of loneliness than our reference group, heterosexual without same-sex experience. And we also find a bunch of difference in social relationships between the LGBT group with the heterosexual without same-sex experience, although no difference between the two heterosexual group with same-sex or different sex group in terms of social relationship. So our next question is, can this difference in social relationships explain the loneliness gap between these sex orientation groups? So that's the next step of analysis. So from the nested models here. So basically, there are two charts here. The chart on the left is to compare LGBT with the reference group, heterosexual without same-sex experience. The chart on the right is to compare the two heterosexual group with and without same-sex experience. So I will talk about the figure on the left first. So LGBT versus reference group. So the first bar here is our base model. The second bar here, and it's the model added the marital status variable. The third bar here is to add family. Then the next is to add friends. Then the next is add the community. Then the final one is to add all the variables. So we actually included, I tested all the social relations variables here, but here we only report the one who had significant effect here. Like the first one, it's mainly about the marital status instead of the marital quality, relationship quality, because if you remember, there was no quality difference in terms of their marital relationship between the group. So you see here, after we add the marital status, the difference reduced. So basically 37% of the difference between LGBT and heterosexual without same-sex experience in loneliness are explained by the marital status variable. Then 28% of the difference is explained by the family relationship. And 17% of relationship is explained by friend. And only 6% explained by the community or neighborhood variable. And in total, together, those social relationships explained about 66% of the loneliness gap by the sex orientation, especially compare LGBT with the reference group. And actually, in the final model, after we control all of those social relationship variable, the difference is not significant between LGB and the reference group. So it's almost totally explained by the social relationship. The chart on the left shows the heterosexual with same-sex experience compared with heterosexual without same-sex experience. So basically, you see here, the social relationship didn't explain the gap here. So to sum up the results, we found loneliness varies by sexual orientation, with the LGB older adults reporting higher level of the loneliness than heterosexual without same-sex experience. And we also move forward to test the mechanism, what factor contribute to their loneliness gap. We found the higher level of loneliness among LGB older adults is largely explained by their lower partnership rate, lower levels of family support, and higher level of the family of friend stream, and lower levels of community participation. And in terms of the marriage, and we also find some very interesting results. So there is no difference in marital quality between LGB and heterosexual couples, because there is some literature suggests that maybe LGB face some disadvantage, so they may have more stress, so their marital quality may be worse than the heterosexual couple, but we didn't find this in our data set. We found that they have same quality of relationship in their marriage between these two groups. And for family and friends, our result, we found the quality is more important than quantity in explaining the LGB loneliness gap. So it's about how much support they should receive and how much strain they receive from the relationship with family and friends, instead of how big is the friendship network and how big is the close family, how many close family members you have. And finally, the community participation is not as important as other relationship explaining the LGB loneliness gap. So generally, this finding is consistent with our hypothesis, the third hypothesis. The inner most layer of the relationship are more important than the outermost layer of the relationship. Finally, the two heterosexual group with and without same-sex experience, although we found they have higher level of the loneliness for those who had the same-sex experience, but social relationship cannot explain this loneliness gap. It's different from the LGB. So we don't know why, what other factor explain here. This group is maybe very different from the LGB identified group. So their life experience probably different. So it definitely needs future research to understand this group of people, because they also feel lonely, but we don't know why. It's not because of their social relationship. It's definitely future research. We want to see how to explain this result here. This study has limitations, and most of the limitation is related to the data limitation, and that also represents the major challenge for this area, the population research about the sexual minority health disparity. So because most of the data sets did not have include the sexual orientation question, if they include sexual orientation question, the sample size is small, maybe. A good thing is, I don't know if you guys know USS data, the 2020, they collected the sexual orientation and gender express data, and that will be some very useful resource to study. But the health measure is limited in the census data. So anyway, the data is limited, so it limits our ability to test some central issue related to sexual minority population, like the intersectionality, how the sexual minority status interact with gender, interacts with race, or some other, minority status to affect health outcome, because of small sample size and we could not test the intersectionality. And also we are limited to understand the heterogeneity of the sexual minority population. So LGB, we combine them together, but they are different. Lesbian, gay, and bisexual is different. Actually, some of my other research, we separate bisexual from the gay and lesbian, and we did find evidence bisexual is more disadvantaged than gay and lesbian people. They are most disadvantaged group. But this data is limited because the number is too small. And another major challenge, disadvantage is the measure of sexual identity. Although this study, we use some sexual experience, but most of the national data who include the sexual orientation question only include one single question about sexual orientation. It's basically sexual identity. How do you identify yourself as gay, lesbian, bisexual, or other? So this is not consistent with our current definition of sexual gender minority population. It's not consistent. I give you some example here, the NIH definition of sexual minority. Sexual gender minority population includes, but not limited to, individuals who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, asexual, transgender, two-spirit, and other asexual. So individuals. So basically what they see here is sexual gender minority population is not just those who are self-identify them as sexual gender minority. It also includes the people like the third group we have here. They didn't identify them as sexual minority, but they had the sexual behavior or attraction to the same sex. They are also sexual minorities, but most of the data sets don't have those measures. So that's the challenge for the current study in this area. Currently, I'm working with my colleagues, and we have a pending R3 proposal to conduct the first systematic national representative population-based study of sexual minority health disparities in among older population, and to understand the mechanisms to leading to these health disparities. I think I will, to conclude, it's important for us to continue our effort to strengthen the partnership and family relationship of sexual minorities in order to eliminate the loneliness gap by sexual orientation. So I think that's the conclusion we find from this study. And I think I will stop here. I want to thank my lab members. My colleague Ning Xie is actually here. So she's my co-author for this study, and my student and colleague here, and also the NIH support for this study. So I'm open to any questions, comments, or suggestions. And thank you for attending listen to the talk today.
Okay, thank you so much for Professor Liu's very interesting presentation. So if you have any questions, you can directly ask Professor Liu, or you can type your question in the chat box.
I wonder if Cathy, you want to stop share the screen? So
sure. That's better.
So I guess I asked first questions. I'm just curious. I have two questions and actually a couple more clarification questions. So first, I don't know much about NCHAP. How did they? What is the mode of data collection? Because I think it could be, sensitive to how people report their sexual identity.
Yeah, that's a very good question. the NSHAP data, they have several different ways. So the core, it's interview. So they have the interview, in-person interview, and also they have the left behind the questionnaire. So the sexual orientation question is actually in the left behind the questionnaire. So it's not an in-person interview. And also because the data also collect the biomarkers, so they also have the lab, the lab, and so that different component of the data. The sexual orientation question is in the left behind the questionnaire.
I see. My other question also quite straightforward. I wonder if location matters. I know you have a number of questions about community participation and I think community quality or something like that, right? But I wonder because, I understand that if you live in like metropolitan areas, like big cities, there's a greater communities of LGBTQ, so therefore they may be less lonely. That's sort of, I wonder if you look at that and maybe, looking at not just community quality, but location interaction between location and, the variables that you look at in the model.
Yeah, that's a very good suggestion. I don't believe NSHAP has like the location of the metropolitan area. They may have the region, for US, we usually talk about the 4 region, Northeast, South, West, and the central area. So they may have the region variable, but I don't think they have the metropolitan area, the variable there. But I think that's a very good suggestion, and I think the good idea. I may go to check the region variable, see if there, because the culture is very different across region in the US. So that's yeah.
And I also have 2 questions, and so the first question is about the comparison group. For example, I find is that it is possible to, for example, compare the LGB group and the heterosexual people with same-sex experience. So it seems like there's also a difference in the loneliness. I wonder whether the difference is significant, and if so, what are possible factors to explain the gap?
Yeah, it's significant. So it's so the loneliness difference between the 2 heterosexual group. You mean the LGB and the heterosexual with same-sex experience?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So that's a good question, but I don't remember whether we tested. But that's a very good question, because that's talk about the heterogeneity. I talk about about the sexual minority population, but I don't remember we tested. Yeah.
Okay. No problem.
That's a good question. I think that's something we can easily test.
Okay. Yeah.
See.
Yeah, and my second question is more related to the general issue of how to collect the data on sexual orientation, because I'm currently also collaborating with someone on the work. Basically, what we do is that we use online search data to in order to identify people's sexual orientation. For example, if people search on Google or on Baidu on certain, for example, LGBT terminologies or behaviors, and then we try to use kind of this data to identify the percent, for example, of LGBTQ population in certain area. And do you have any comments, and do you think this is a possible way to get a better measure of the LGBT orientation?
So this is the research in China, right?
Yeah.
In China. So yeah, because the context is very important. It's not ideal. It's not ideal. But that's probably something you probably best you can do in China. And because the culture, the social contact research on this topic in China is very different. It's very, very different from the context in US. So in US, you know, it's people are, there's still a lot of stigma and people still have concern coming out. But generally, it's become more, you know, open, especially the younger generation. So that the older adults, you know, it's still some people, but the younger generation become more open about this. And China is different. You know, I don't know. I hope we can you know, stay in touch on this topic. I'm excited you're doing some research about China on this. You know, it's I think you use a way, you know, probably you can think best, because I think you probably have more expertise than me about the context in China, how to do this research. So what I can say, it's not ideal, but it's probably the best you can do in the context of China. So when you publish paper or you do some research, you know, the context is very important. So people understand, you know, difference there. So if you do the same research in the US, and people will say, no, that's not a good matter. But in China, I think that, yeah, that's probably you can do.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So thank you so much for helpful suggestions. Yeah. So are there any questions? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, okay, yeah. So do you have any questions?
Hi. Hi, Dr. Liu. Hi, everyone. So thanks so much for the presentation. I really enjoyed it. I just am wondering about maybe more of like, so building off Cook's question on maybe like different settings and different contexts. Would there be any room for like stigma measures or forms of like structural stigma as well? So I'm thinking maybe sort of like, you know, level 2 multi-level kind of modeling approaches where you could sort of maybe capture some of these like contextual stigma variables and extend like the study.
Yeah, sure. That's a good suggestion. Yeah, definitely. Let's come back to the, I think, Park's question about the region, and if we can have more regional level variables, we can certainly do some multi-level analysis or something.
Thing like, you know, your data is from 2015 and 16, right? So that's a little, I mean, so I don't know. So that's right around the time of legalization of same-sex marriage. I wonder, would that matter? And perception across regions would be quite different, right? I mean, we would think like the South would be very conservative, and that may affect, you know, this population.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, region is very important. In this case. Yeah. Yeah, this gives me some idea for my future research too. But I have to double check whether the NSHAP has a region variable, because a lot of the US data, the geography variable is sensitive. You know, region is variable is okay, but a lot of more detailed geography data, like the state or something, it's like a controversial, confidential data and restricted. You have to get some special process to access the data. For most of the US data, it's like that, yeah.
So Rainer, I mean, may I introduce, also have done a lot of works on LGBT population in Singapore. So he might have something to share. And I think Shannon from NTU is also another rising star in demography.
Oh yeah, Shannon, we met.
Hi.
Shannon, yeah, we met at US.
Hi, Cathy.
Before.
Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you this
Good
way.
to see you again.
Yeah.
So maybe
I actually have a couple of questions. That I guess I'd like to find out from you a bit more about. So I think the first question is kind of directly related to what you have. So I think we also know, and I think Ning also published a paper recently about the composition of networks, right, in LGB older adults and non-LGB older adults, and I think she found that there were more it was more friend centered and less kind of family focused. And I guess from your paper, would that mean that the friend centered networks are not compensating enough for the kind of support to explain some of that loneliness? Would you say that, or?
No, it's actually the general literature about the LGB is friends is relative for maybe more important than family, because the heterosexual literature is clear family is more important than friends, but the LGB is maybe different. There is evidence here the sexual minority people rely more on their friends than their family when the stress things happened. And our research here, we didn't find the size of the friendship, the number of friends difference there. So we didn't find that. That is a little bit different from previous research. But note here, we work on older population, so it's maybe different from the general population. So, and but consistent with other research, we find the friends, they did receive more support from their friends than the straight people. This is consistent with previous literature, the general literature. And also, I think we are the first paper, one of the first paper I know to point out the LGB people, they also receive more stream from their friends, because most of the literature emphasize LGBT people receive more support from friends are important. But we are the first time to talk about, they also receive more stream from their friends, and that lead to their loneliness. So because the friends give their more stream, lead to their loneliness. So if friends is also important, but if you look at the numbers, it's compare with other family relationship, compare with and marital status is not as that important than
right. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think thank you for kind of going through that, because I think the friends family kind of dynamic in LGBT populations is quite interesting, especially, I mean, just what you said about family friends giving you strain. I think I guess like work of Claude Fisher talks about how like with friends you can kind of like get rid of them, right? With family you can't really get rid of them, and maybe that is a bigger, but in this case I think it seems like friends matter quite a lot more for this population. My second question is really about, I guess, similar to kind of Cook and Rainer, what they're talking about geographical region. I guess I wonder if you've seen in your work in NCHAP, I guess NCHAP is one of the first few kind of studies to kind of have pretty much a lot of information on sexual minorities. I wonder if you see any kind of like systematic missing kind of people not wanting to report, right? So maybe in certain regions you might see like people don't want to report. Especially, I'm asking because I don't know if the sexual minority section is in the Leave Behind questionnaire.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I wonder if you suspect there are any kind of systematic differences across regions, especially maybe for instance in the South there's maybe an underreporting of sexual minority, and how this might kind of play into this analysis.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a Left Behind questionnaire. It's basically like there are one let's see. So there's a some portion of the people who didn't answer the Left Behind questionnaire. It's definitely some selection there. There are selection bias. So the people who open to to answer this question, and people who refuse to answer this question, I didn't do the test, but I think it will be some difference there. So there are some selection, there are some bias there. So it's more likely those people who refuse to answer the question or misreport, it's more likely to be more conservative, right? If that's right, so it's probably in the South area, people are more likely to not answer the question than other, but I didn't do the test, I didn't analyze the data, but that's something, definitely can test. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think I guess Raina has a question. So maybe I think Raina's question is more important than my last question.
No, please. I didn't want to talk. That's why I put it in the chat. So please go ahead. I took up too much time already.
I guess so. My final question, I guess, is this loneliness item, right? I think the 3-item loneliness scale has been used in quite a number of studies. We use it quite a bit in Singapore as well. But I wonder if you have any opinions on this. And I always have trouble trying to contextualize what is the difference in loneliness, right? So for instance, you showed just now that there's like a 0.3 points of difference in loneliness, and like for me, I'm just always thinking about how to explain this to kind of lay people, right? What does it mean that you have a 0.3 difference in loneliness? How do we compare that with like other things, like maybe loneliness leads to worse health outcomes? Like I wonder if you have any kind of thoughts about how you explain, I guess, this 0.3 difference in loneliness.
Yeah, this is a good question. This is not just about loneliness. It's a lot about, all some outcomes, other outcomes can apply too. So what's the substantial meaning of this skill, right? So one way, let me think. You can definitely see the range, talk about, but frankly, a lot of times the social factor, the effect is small. I have to say the social factor, the effect is small, although, statistically it's significant, but a lot of times it's not as big as you hope. That's just the thing. And one way I think you can compare, when you make an argument, you can compare with some like recognized difference, like in US, the race difference, the education difference. That's something people more tend to recognize. So you can compare your effect with education effect, with the race effect. Then if it's comparable, that's something you can argue. Or like I'm thinking about my marriage research, some people also question, that's so important, the effect there. And so not me, but other scholars, top scholars, they compare the marital effect on health with health behavior effect on health. So you may read paper, people see the effect of marriage is comparable to smoking on health. So because people always, people tend to agree smoking has negative effect, recognize the negative effect, agree on this negative effect. But if people who are not familiar with the marriage literature, it's marriage really so important. But if you show them the results, the effect, the marital effect is comparable to the smoking effect. So that's a good way for make the argument. So I think you can probably use a similar way if you find something different and you don't know how to make the arguments different. You can compare with some, general recognized risk factor. If they are similar, comparable, then I think that's a way you can make the argument. But frankly, a lot of social factors, it's not, I think that's because of social work. So it's so complicated. It's not like you do an experiment in a lab. You just use the rat. There are only factors you can control, right? But the social work is social world is so complicated. There are tens of the variables, and on analysis only can cover some variables there. So I think it's just the reality of the social science research and reality of social work, social world. So. Anyway, I hope this is helpful.
Okay, yeah, so yeah, it seems that everyone is very excited from the findings and results from Professor Liu's presentation. So here in the chat box, we have the last question from Rina. The differences in support from friends and family between LGBT and non-LGBT population are interesting. I wonder if there are implications for living arrangement, such as assisted living, retirement community, and yeah, since we're running out of time, and Professor Liu, do you want to have a quick response to this question?
Yeah, I think definitely you can think about more policy implication. We didn't think about that much in our paper, but that's definitely you can think about, right? So for LGB, the family, if they don't have a lot of family support, it's definitely, you know, think about the friends. That's an option. But just remember our result also show friends will also give you the strength. So that's I think definitely can think about some implication on this.
Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So thank you so much for Professor Liu, and also thank you everyone. So if you don't have any other questions, so yeah, and this will be the end of this presentation. And it also was very late for Professor Liu in the United States. And finally, please join me to thank you, Professor Liu, again for your interesting presentation. And please pay attention to our other CFPR seminars. Okay.
Yeah, I want to thank you so much. Thank you everyone for attending the talk, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my work. Thank you.
Hopefully we'll see you in Singapore sometime.
Hopefully I hope, I look forward.
Bye-bye. Good night.
Okay, bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.